Thank you. You are all here because you have the responsibility as the senior leaders in the public sector to ensure that those who you lead are aware of and comply with the South Australian sector values and the Code of Ethics. I'm here because I have the statutory obligation to identify and investigate corruption in public administration and to prevent or minimise corruption, misconduct and maladministration by education and or by evaluation of practices, policies and procedures of public authorities. The conduct with which I'm concerned is antithetical to the conduct that is assumed in the public sector values and the conduct addressed in the Code of Ethics. You're all aware, of course, of the content of the public sector values and the Code of Ethics, and you're aware of the fact that they do not relate to criminal conduct, but more generally address misconduct and maladministration. My office and the Office of Public Integrity were established to assist in maintaining integrity in public administration in South Australia by the exercise of the two functions to which I've referred. I was established in a statutory sense to assist you to perform your obligations. On the 2nd of September this year, we will have been operational for 4 years. In those 4 years, we've gathered a substantial amount of intelligence and data about the workings of the public sector. The story is not all good, but on the other hand, it's not all bad. So far, we've not uncovered any evidence of systemic corruption of the kind seen in New South Wales and Queensland. That's not to say it doesn't exist, it's just the fact that it's not yet been discovered, if it does exist. Most of the corruption that we have been investigating involves the opportunistic conduct of individuals, which has often been permitted to occur because of the failure of the public authority in which they're employed to ensure that it has proper practices, policies and procedures in place, or to ensure adherence to those practices. We've ascertained which agencies have problems and the type of problems they have. We know that many agencies need to improve their governance around recruitment, procurement, control of credit cards, confidential information and the management of assets. We also know which agencies have cultural problems that result in inappropriate behaviour by public officers. We will be making more of that intelligence by sharing it publicly in the future so that those agencies and other agencies can learn and improve from what we have learnt over these last 4 years. We are currently working on a report on the local government sector and a report on the way the state cares for its most vulnerable citizens, both of which we hope to publish before the end of the year. Since commencing operations and until the 30th of June this year, we've received 1,810 complaints from members of the public and 2,302 reports from public officers claiming that they suspect public officers have engaged in corruption or that public authorities have engaged in maladministration. The public sector values alludes to public officers' reporting obligations in the part headed Honesty and Integrity. However, can I impress upon you that all public officers have a statutory duty to report to the Office for Public Integrity any conduct that they reasonably suspect raises a potential issue of corruption or serious or systemic misconduct or maladministration. And that obligation is reinforced in the Code of Ethics. Of the 4,112 complaints and reports that we have received, more than 600 have been assessed as raising a potential issue of corruption. In the order of 1,000 have been assessed as raising a potential issue of misconduct, and a not insubstantial number in the order of the low 100s have been assessed as raising a potential issue of maladministration. So you'll see that something in the order of 1,700 or 1,700 to 1,800 of the 4,112 complaints and reports have needed to be actioned. Each of those types of conduct, if they are allowed to persist, make it difficult for the public sector to deliver effective services in public administration. As I said, the second of the primary objects of my office is to prevent or minimise corruption, misconduct and maladministration in public administration. I argue that the very existence of my office is a deterrent and therefore somewhat satisfies the primary object of the Act. But then again, I would make that argument. I do, of course, acknowledge that despite what I might argue, my existing is not simply enough. An important function given to me by the ICAC Act is an education function. My office must, through education, seek to prevent or minimise the type of conduct to which I've referred by the education of public officers in the public sector. All initiatives undertaken by my Education and Communications Unit are aimed at serving my prevention function. Since the commencement of my office, my staff and I have addressed over 16,000 people in workshops, seminars, lectures and events of this kind. This is in fact the 198th time that I've spoken on the functions of my office over the last nearly 4 years. I can see some of you would have thought that or would have hoped that I would have finished at 197. We've developed online resources, including videos and an e-learning course. Our ICAC induction e-learning course has been completed by more than 700 people over the last 18 months, and our videos have had over 30,000 plays in the most recent reporting period. The website is also the access point for more traditional resources like fact sheets, brochures and posters. Last financial year, the website welcomed almost 30,000 visitors. We have developed an excellent, and I say that without boasting, an excellent internal investigation seminar and workshop to assist agencies to undertake the type of internal investigations that I might refer to them. We have committed ourselves to training all new police cadets on integrity. We have trained over 200 new cadets so far this year, and I expect that the number will reach 450 by the end of this year. As you know, corruption for the purpose of the ICAC Act must involve some criminal conduct committed by a public officer in the discharge of the public officer's duties. The majority of the 610 complaints that have been assessed as raising a potential issue of corruption have not been investigated by my office, but have been referred to SAPOL for investigation. The ICAC Act allows me to determine whether corruption should be investigated by me or by SAPOL. The matters that I've referred to SAPOL are matters that do not, in my opinion, require the specialist services of an anti-corruption agencies. They are usually the type of matters that SAPOL routinely investigates. For example, many of the matters that have been referred to SAPOL involve common assaults or the exploitation of some of the most vulnerable members of our community. I view those matters as extraordinarily serious, but at the same time I recognise that they do not require for an investigation a specialist anti-corruption branch. Matters that are investigated by my office are more complex and are matters that require an investigation by a specialist anti-corruption branch which has powers wider than SAPOL has. One of the difficulties we are finding in our investigations is determining whether there has been any crime committed at all. Most of the crimes that are committed by way of corruption in South Australia are victimless crimes, if you accept for that purpose that the state cannot be a victim. When I decide to investigate a matter, I mean to determine the truth and whether or not there is sufficient evidence to substantiate criminal charges. If the investigation is unable to uncover sufficient evidence of a crime, then the file is immediately closed. If, after investigation, I'm satisfied that there is sufficient evidence to do so, I will refer the matter to the Director of Public Prosecutions, who will independently decide whether or not to prosecute the matter. To date, prosecutions brought as a result of my investigations have related to fraud in relation to corporate credit cards, theft, dishonestly dealing with documents, improper use of confidential information, and a number of counts of abuse of public office. A number of public officers have already been sentenced to imprisonment. Most recently, an education manager at TAFE was sentenced to 3 years, 3 months imprisonment for conspiring with a non-public officer to present 74 fraudulent invoices to TAFE, which defrauded TAFE of $153,000. The non-public officer was sentenced to the same term of imprisonment, but with a longer non-parole period. That crime was only allowed to occur because of inappropriate processes within TAFE. There are presently 19 persons, 17 of whom are or were public officers before the courts in matters that are still to be determined. The allegations in relation to those matters include misuse of corporate credit cards, deception, theft, failing to act honestly, assaults, misuse of confidential information, making false declarations, and failing to disclose pecuniary interests, and again, abuse of public office. Recently, a former public trustee employee, Alana Bartels, pleaded guilty to abuse of public offices and aggravated theft for unlawfully removing items from deceased estates. Bartels utilised her position as an estate service officer to authorise the disposal of motor vehicles with monies obtained from the sales kept to benefit herself. She also authorised the transfer of monies from an estate account after she submitted a false invoice. Further, she kept jewellery belonging to estates for herself, which she then pawned to benefit herself. She is currently awaiting sentence. In all of these cases, except for the assaults, of course, the victim was the state of South Australia. I've completed a number of other investigations and have referred a number of other matters to the Director of Public Prosecutions, one of which he has recently told me will result in a prosecution, and I expect to release a public statement in relation to that matter in the near future. I'm sometimes surprised at the ease at which some public officers have been able to misuse public money and public resources over a long period of time and without detection. This type of behaviour is often enabled by inadequacies in the practices, policies and procedures of the public authorities which employ them. I'll return to that point in a minute. In addition to my function to investigate corruption, I must also assist inquiry agencies and public authorities to identify and deal with misconduct and maladministration. I do this by referring complaints and reports that give rise to potential issues of that kind to a public authority to which I can give directions, if I deem it appropriate to do so, or to an inquiry agencies. The public authorities must carry out the investigations in accordance with my directions. A substantial number of matters, more than 1,000 relating to misconduct and maladministration, have been referred to the public authority in which the conduct occurred. In its original form, the ICAC Act allowed me to investigate misconduct or maladministration. However, in April of this year, the Act was amended to include a definition of serious or systemic misconduct or maladministration and limited me to investigating only that type of conduct. I did not disagree with the amendment because I think my office should only be concerned with serious or systemic conduct. Misconduct and maladministration will now be taken to be serious or systemic if it is of such a significant nature that it would undermine public confidence in the relevant public authority or in public administration in general and has significant implications for the relevant public authority or public administration generally. The majority of complaints and reports that we receive will not meet this threshold, which means in the future that I will rarely investigate misconduct and maladministration. In the case of misconduct, that does not matter because since I've assumed this office, I have not investigated any matters of misconduct. If, however, I do investigate a type of conduct such as maladministration, exercising the powers of an inquiry agency, I must do this by exercising the powers of the South Australian Ombudsman. That does not make me the Ombudsman, or in my investigation an Ombudsman investigation, as has been suggested in recent times. It remains an investigation by me, the Independent Commissioner, by borrowing the powers granted to another statutory officeholder under another Act. A large number of misconduct allegations that are received concern inappropriate conduct, workplace bullying and harassment, coercion and failure to comply with policies or procedures. It is the type of conduct that the Code of Ethics and the public sector values address. I'm of the view that a public authority is best placed to investigate its own misconduct and the misconduct of its own employees, as it is that the public authority that will be ultimately responsible for making any decisions and imposing any sanctions against the public officer who is found to have committed the serious misconduct. I recommended in my 2014, 2015 and 2015-2016 annual reports that a misconduct register be established to assist public authorities during the recruitment process to determine whether or not a prospective employee has previously had his or her employment terminated for misconduct or has resigned prior to the resolution of a misconduct resolution. What I don't want to see is what has happened in the past, and that is that a public officer who has committed serious misconduct and has been dismissed or has resigned during the misconduct inquiry turn up in another agency within weeks of being terminated from his or her previous position. I've met with the Commissioner for Public Sector Employment, Commissioner Magarey, about the establishment of such a register, and I understand that she has or is about to take steps to establish a working group to determine the best way that is to be done. In my 2015-2016 annual report, I also noted that public officers are often suspended on pay while an investigation into allegations of misconduct and maladministration proceeds. Sometimes the suspension can be a very long time. I said in that report that there ought to be a central body which must be notified when a person is suspended on pay and when that suspension occurred. I hinted in that report that the body could also be the Commissioner for Public Sector Employment, and that is now, unfortunately, my view. I think that office is the most appropriate for that disclosure, and that office could monitor those suspensions and the continuing financial cost to the state. A prolonged suspension of a public officer has at least two consequences. First, a significant loss to the state, and secondly, a significant stress upon the public officer, and both of those results should be avoided. I've investigated matters in relation to maladministration. Maladministration investigation conducted by my office have all been conducted in private as required by the ICAC Act. I have publicly stated that I would prefer that Parliament provide me with the discretion to conduct maladministration investigations by way of public hearings, but the government has made it clear that that type of conduct, the investigation of that type of conduct, must be held in private. If I'm of the view that it is appropriate to do so and in the public interest, I can publicly publish a report on the investigation. And I've done that in respect of the state-owned land at Gilman or the sale of that land, and I anticipate that I'll publish a report at the conclusion of my maladministration investigation into the Oakton Older Persons Mental Health Facility. And then there is another matter in which I'm presently investigating, which I also anticipate I'll publish a report. I think that maladministration in public administration is a scourge. Based upon my 4 years' experience, it is my assessment that maladministration is the most significant threat to the integrity of public institutions in this state. I'm amazed by the extent of poor practices, policies and procedures within public authorities that has led to substantial mismanagement of public resources or improper use of public money. In some cases, existing policies or procedures appear to be either ignored or intentionally circumvented in order to achieve a desired outcome. In other cases, no such policies or procedures exist. A lack of proper record keeping makes accountability more difficult. In my view, corruption and maladministration are in the majority of cases inextricably linked. Maladministration allows for the commission of corruption. In some cases, underlying maladministration is to such an extent that improper conduct cannot be prosecuted or subject to disciplinary action because it has been effectively condoned by senior officers, often for significant periods of time. We have, in fact, undertaken several corruption investigations that have been thwarted by the maladministration that has existed in the public authority. I'm also empowered to evaluate the practices, policies and procedures of inquiry agents and public authorities with a view to advancing comprehensive and effective systems for preventing or minimising corruption, misconduct and maladministration in public administration. Excuse me. I've commenced 2 such evaluations since we began operations, one being an evaluation of the Office of the Police Ombudsman and the other an evaluation of the Public Trustee. The evaluation of the Police Ombudsman was not completed as a decision was taken to close that office, which will occur on the 1st of September this year, making the evaluation unnecessary. The evaluation of the Public Trustee was born out of the corruption investigation to which I've referred of Alana Bartels and the circumstances in which the conduct occurred. I expect that evaluation to be completed soon and the report to be tabled in Parliament by the end of this year. The leaders of our public institutions, such as yourselves, are ultimately responsible for the administration of the government agencies. It is the responsibility of the leadership to ensure that policies, practices and procedures are clear, well known to the public officers within the agency and adhered to by those public officers. None of us should underestimate the effect of promoting and embedding ethics as a solution to the kinds of governance and cultural problems that give rise to inappropriate conduct in public administration. Most people do not engage in the type of inappropriate conduct to which I've referred and with which I'm concerned. But most, the research shows, will occasionally commit small indiscretions during their time in public employment. That might be by claiming an additional 10 minutes on their time sheets or helping themselves to a ream of paper. Nothing worth an ICAC investigation, but when multiplied by the number of persons in public administration in this state can be quite damaging. These types of indiscretions can be reduced by you reminding your people about their moral and ethical obligations in regard to their conduct at work and reminding them of their public purpose and why it is so important that they engage in conduct in conformity with that purpose. A culture of accountability cannot be created and maintained unless every person in the organisation understands what is required of them. We should reinforce good practice, good behaviour, and make sure everyone understands the purpose to which I've referred. If this is done, the culture will improve and better decisions will be made by those who have the responsibility of making decisions. Lastly, of course, and it almost goes without saying, you have the obligation to lead by example. You must all adhere to the public sector values and the code of ethics. Thank you for listening to me.